I was at Abrams. Deborah Aronson, then the editor and senior editor, just in passing said, "Where's your book?" And it wasn't like it was an actual invitation. It wasn't a contract or anything, but I sort of stuck my foot in the door and said, "Actually, I have an idea for a book. But it's not a monograph, it's a memoir." So she said, "Great, can I read something?" And I said, "Well, no, I haven't written anything." And she said, "Can I see something?" And I said, "I can do that quickly." So I envisioned this as a book called The Designer and His Problems. I did a talk here. I did a talk in New York a year before, titled this. This was the image. Leanne Shepton made this beautiful wooden book. And so I was just imagining this as the cover, and this is what it was going to be called. And I quickly did some super simple spreads. I was really imagining it as a book that was words and not images, although there would be some images in it. So I did these really quickly, and there was an interest in going forward. So the reason I thought that this might be a good idea was really because of these two books. This wonderful book on the work of Robert Irwin, Seeing is Forgetting the Name of the Thing One Sees, by Lawrence Welcher. We have a Super Bowl. Nice going, guys. All right, and then this book by Stephen King on writing, which is a memoir of the craft. So both of these books were books I had read, and especially the Irwin book. If any of you read it, anybody's read that book? Read it. It's fantastic. His work is very hard to understand and harder to experience in some way. And this book did such an amazing job of telling the artist's life story, and you really understand where this work comes from after you read this book. And I figured, like, graphic design has a similar problem in terms of people understanding why we are obsessed and love this thing that we do, you know? And so I thought, why isn't there a book like this for graphic designers? So that was really where the beginning of this thing started. So I started, of course, with an essay about my first car, which was the AMC Gremlin. And I got this question: what does this have to do with design? Surprisingly enough, Deb didn't think the problem was with the writing. She actually thought the writing was good. She just didn't get the connection. So I went back and did another essay. I can't remember what that was about, but I got the same question again. And then I did another essay, and I got the same question again. So we had gotten up to sort of copy editing on these things, but I just couldn't turn the corner. I got busy with other things, and it got shelved. So 5 years later, I got another question. I'm not exactly sure this is what you said or wrote to me, but John was like, "What about a book?" Now, John, I worked with for years. He's a great designer, book cover designer, and he had left his old life as a creative director at Vintage to become the creative director at Abrams. But he's been taking on more of a editorial responsibility.
They somehow let me start doing it.
Yeah. So I was like, well, actually, there's this book that I started with Deb, and he didn't know anything about it. So the first question was, for myself, writing a few essays is one thing, but I definitely did. I'm a graphic designer, after all. I've authored a few books, but not in the way that I was envisioning this book. And I really had to ask myself this question: can I write this, or should I write it? And it was a question I asked John. Should we get someone to write the book, or should I attempt to write it? And so John said, well, just send me the writing that you've done so far. And the email was called "You Asked for It." And this was a really long email, but it had everything in it, and we were off. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was hoping that this would be the big Paul Sahre pictorial monograph, which a lot of people were interested in.
And still are.
And still are. But, one of the things I had been thinking about was how to publish graphic design books now, when we have this prevalence of things on the internet and everyone has a website and Instagram. All the work's already up there to be seen. So how can we publish design books in a different way? through other kinds of narrative arcs and things like that. And then, so I was sort of hoping for this sort of thing, but then Paul sent me these essays, which I read as essays, I read as stories, and I thought they were amazing, and they were all about design in one way or another.
And I hadn't done anything more to them. I think, the right person, or maybe time passing, I don't know. But, and definitely someone that I'm friends with, we've worked together for years, and that we trust each other in this way. So that helps too. So these were some of the early ones, mainly because A Designer and His Problems, there was a little pushback, let's say. Was there pushback? Or there was just a question, is this the best title?
Oh, for a title?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it needed some explanation as a title. And I don't think that... I think the title we ended up with is really good.
So anyway, yeah, this actually is great in that just what just happened, but the original context of this was, I don't know, we had come up with those other ones and it didn't quite seem like it. I was even sending them, if you were reading, titles I hated. And I was like, I don't know, word two-dimensional man, but I sent him two-dimensional man, and this is how John responded in an email. And I'm like, oh, and no. He's like, no, that's good, it's good. And immediately he's like, that's it, that's definitely the title, even though Debbie hates it. So
we'll get to that.
all right, so we were off and going. So I wanted to show you some of the cover studies that I did for this, and this was picking up from my intern Christian, who's I don't think was here. Christian, you here? An intern who was doing a lot of stuff before this, so I picked up from where he left off. But the thing that I really sort of like the idea of two-dimensional man relating to kind of like primitive man, and mark making, cave painting, graphic designer missing a thumb relates to something exactonized. There's a specific reference to it in the book. Probably you recognize this. This is a type director's reference. Years ago I did the annual, and one of my ideas, probably the worst idea I've ever come up with for anything, was that I would do all the type for the Type Directors Club annual with a mouse, but written with my foot. And the poster was Type Directors Club, we're rewarding excellence in typography, and it's the worst typography ever that anyone could ever make. And there was a picture of me, at my workstation like this. We didn't go in that direction. And I was always sort of sad, just because the worst idea in the history of graphic design should actually be made at some point. Anyway, so I did this, but then we didn't do it. It got killed again.
My left foot was already taken.
Yes. So these were some studies. And then we started playing with the human form, of course, because it's two-dimensional man. So we started just kind of pulling apart things. There was a ton of studies I couldn't find. We were looking at Russian, constructivist art, and sort of ended up in this front and back cover thing with, a person at the computer on fire, and then it deconstructed on the cover. And then that just, maybe there's no type on the cover. Is it just a jumble? Are they colored shapes? Are they more organized? Is there, there's different color studies going on, big type, whole bunch of these things, and we eventually arrived at this. And then John was like, phew, all right. I don't know how long that process took, but I was driving him crazy already, and then I was like, maybe I'll just mess it all up. So I was just totally, I didn't think these were actual covers. I don't think I presented like, this should be it. Oh, okay.
Well,
all right.
it's funny because, in one sense, I find that like any kind of real worthwhile project that I've ever been involved with, at some point, you feel like the entire thing can totally collapse. Like this whole house of cards is just going to collapse. And so we were just about to send the book to the printer, and we had a cover design and everything. And then that day, Paul sent me these things.
He's gone off the rail. But then I'm like, no, maybe it should be really clear. Maybe it shouldn't be, it's got to be. I want people to buy this book, unbelievably, suffering from my own self as a book cover designer. And then we were getting into stupid things like, does the pattern creep out onto the cover, like in doing studies. And he eventually, talked me off the ledge, and that was the cover, and the back cover. Okay, so a couple other things I wanted to talk about. Gabriel Levinson, I was hoping he would be here. I just want to read this. This was a note that I got early on in the writing from Gabriel that I read it again today. I'm just like, it is inevitable as you dig deeper and make connections between you and you that you will question whether you should be writing certain stories from your past. Write it. Allow yourself this, especially if it makes you feel uncomfortable, right through the discomfort. There is no moment where you are not in complete control of your narrative. So let yourself write it now, and maybe you'll burn it before anyone else reads it, or maybe you'll share it with me and we can discuss, but even then, you are in control. You can decide to pull it if you feel it touches the wrong nerve or is exploitive. Nothing will go in your book that you don't want there. Family is chaos, design is control. You are two-dimensional, man. It's just awesome. And this was a reaction to the personal aspects of this, because it's anybody who's done anything that's you're really getting into family, it really gets weird in ways that you never expect. So anyway, God, there was so much of this. And this was a pretty calm page, if I remember correctly, in terms of the edits. And then there was the design of the book. And since we're at the Type Directors Club, I felt like we needed to do this. So I used two typefaces. The first one on the cover is Apricot, which I'm like totally in love with for some reason. I personally really like the fact that people tend not to know what the typeface is, can't identify it, When you see Helvetica, it's Helvetica, but this is something else. It does a lot of the same things, and it's also funkier and more sort of geometric. And I brought a book up here. I was going to tell you who the designer is. We should do that. It is designed by Colophon. They're in the UK. They describe it as an amalgamation of a classic realist sans serif typefaces of Johnson, Gill Sans, and Franklin Gothic. And I've been using this on all kinds of other things lately too. And then the text is all Miller text and Miller text ital. And of course that was designed by Matthew Carter in 1997. Traditional typeface based on the Scotch Roman style that originated from the Scottish type foundries of Alexander Miller and William Miller, 1810 to 1820. It's highly readable in text. I have also been using this typeface a lot too. And I wish I could show you all these experiments with layout in terms of the book, but from the beginning I thought it just needs to look like a book that you read, even though I can do anything with it, which was really a mind fuck for me because I just had to make it look like a formatted text book, I felt like. Because the way I've been describing this book is about design, but it's not a design book. I think there's a difference. So one of the things that didn't end up happening, I was going to do a lot of things where the images were all floating around in the background. That ended up leaving for some reason. I still sort of like it there. This is the grid we settled on. Wow. I want you to think about that. Yeah. Those red lines are very important. But of course, you can go on and on about why the decisions were made to use this particular grid. And if we had more time, I could bore you for 3 hours talking about it, but I won't. And this is a fairly typical text spread where the page numbers are just relating to the indent. The chapter headers, the new essays start in this manner, so there's a visual cue that something new is happening. And really, there's only a few places where I sort of play with the typography in the book. So this is the table of contents. So basically the book ended up being in 3 parts. The first part is chaos, family life, growing up. The middle part is order and going to design school. And then the last part is entropy. And it's basically me trying to apply order that I learned in design school to my life, which is a bad mistake and you should not try it. And there are these types of things that happen in the book, but again, it's very, very minimal. I just created a bad rag there, and then this is an example of a terrible rag is the footnote.
You know how hard it is to get the printer to not fix that.
Yes, no, I know.
I think we're pointing out that something's wrong.
Yeah. And there's these types of things happening. This is when Emily and I broke up, so the text is sort of, but I really used it sparingly. I also wanted to show you a bunch of images. I'm assuming the book's been out for a month maybe now, and this is my 4th New York event. Some of you are thinking, well, enough already with the events in New York City, but this is a very different one tonight, obviously, than ones I've been doing if you've been to any of the other ones. So if you've already read the book, these will be fun to see. If you haven't yet, maybe they'll be fun. This is a piece I did called Dandelions that's referred to in the book. This is a drawing I did from a still from a Tony's Pizza commercial. He's just found out that the cheese on his frozen pizza is got the same ingredients as glue. This is 3 cats wearing glasses. There are also, so I drew a lot as a kid, that's how I got into graphic design. There were also a lot of hilarious conversations I had, because there had to be some embarrassing photographs in there. So this is my brother Angus, sister Sharon, and me with Pierre Lagunier, who was a local hockey player. My sister saw this in the book at one point, and she said, "Over my dead body." So that one got deleted. This was another one I was thinking about. Look, check out my Star Wars shirt. That's probably 1976, and fence. And there were a whole bunch. I've got so many pictures of my brother Angus, who worked for Ringling Brothers. He featured prominently in the book, and I ended up being very careful about using images of him. But really, Angus is the interesting character in this book, not me. I'll definitely say that. Here we are again in Baltimore in 1997. And then there was the editing of the images, and there were some funny things that came out here too. This was a poster I referred to in the book. This is my Kareem Abdul-Jabbar poster. We were having these conversations, can we actually run this? And so, if you'll see in the book, I can't remember what page it's on, but there was some creative cropping, let's just say, that happened where that's the actual poster. There's an essay in there about a visit I made to New York City, and I found this flyer on the street in 1976 in the squalor of New York City, and it freaked me out. And I don't have it. I lost it. But this was what would happen when you were doing book. You're like, I remember this thing really strongly. I had the Grim Reaper on it. And then you go on the internet, and there it is. Which I'm like, oh my God, there it is. I wasn't imagining things. And if you've read the book, this is the cover of Tissue Cleansing Through Bowel Management. We really considered putting this in there again, but not for copyright reasons. This is also a great book. You got to pick this up. And this was fun. This is an autograph from D. Snyder to my brother Ken. Ken, stay twisted. D. Snyder. He's the front man for Twisted Sister. This didn't make it in either, although I tried. My dad was an aerospace engineer, and we have all these he really was into photography for a time. So this is an example of the Sahre family picture slides. You know, this is one of the extra nuclear bombs they didn't use in World War II. And things like this. Does anybody recognize this? My wife Emily's not here. This is where we had our first date in 1997 in the Genie Bar in the Royalton. If I could go anywhere in time, it would be back to that place and that time. Just amazing, you know. So these things are like in there. Do you put them in? Do you not put them in? This didn't make it in. It's not there anymore, which is really sucks. My other brother Greg features in the book, not as much as Angus, mainly because Greg is still alive. And I would just say that it's a lot easier writing about someone when they're dead. So there was a lot of, my brother is deaf, he has a learning disability, but he's always making things. This was an amazing thing he made for my sister and I when we came back from college. He would just do these things. Recently he mowed, Harry and Eli's name in the front yard when we came up to visit in Comic Sans. And if some of you are wondering what that patch is, Greg makes stuff out of needlepoint, and it's a plastic canvas needlepoint. This is the sign language for "I love you," and this was something he did that I had a very embarrassing reaction to. When I first saw it, I thought it looked like a symbol for a gay death cult, which was not Greg's intent. Greg lives in my mom's house still. He's in, he doesn't have a job. He just makes stuff down there. So anyway, this was part of a campaign I did years ago. So basically, just iron this on something that needs some love. And there were things about my brother's passing that aren't. So if you read the book, this is the sketch that I was handed by the tattoo artist. And again, hopefully you'll read the book. My brother had gotten a tattoo before he died. And it was, I wanted to recreate it on his casket, and I had to find the tattoo parlor because I didn't want to find it another way. And this was the actual Xerox he handed me, and this is the actual casket. And this is not in the book, and it's the last slide I'm going to show you before we talk with Debbie. But it was a very weird thing where, I was talking about sort of painting something or designing something in the book, but then I'm like, do I show the end result in the book? And it's not a portfolio piece, And it really isn't about what it looks like. It's about doing it. So I decided to not put it in. It was just a really strange thing, because I'm sort of making a point about being a graphic designer is something that gives you a sense of purpose and that you do when things go bad, I do anyway. And he helps you get through them, but it's not a job, it's like who you are. But then when you're doing something like I was doing with this book, it brings out really interesting, strange decisions you have to make about whether you include something or not based on how you're wanting it to be understood. And in the end, I just decided it was probably stronger without. So, we can turn this off now.
Most of my questions are going to be for Paul, but some of them are going to be for John too. So thank you, John, for sitting up here with us. What is that banging?
What's been going on?
And then also, I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. But first, I do have to say, I've read the book twice now, and it is just a really wonderful book. And I'm really glad that you were so controlled in the way that you manage the actual writing with the graphics, because I think that it is a book that needs to be read. It is a story, and it's extraordinarily well written. And so kudos to both you and John for bringing this to life. But I do have a couple of questions that I want to start with. First, just in looking at the presentation, so I didn't know what Paul was going to be showing, and so some of my questions are actually going to overlap with what you've shown, which is perfect. But I have a couple of questions that are related specifically to the presentation. You have 48,000 emails in your inbox?
Wow.
Try to use it.
I'm loud. I can totally go loud. Everybody can hear me back there, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Test.
there you go.
All right. So I did not know I had 48,000 in there, but I keep I don't get rid of any emails.
No, but
That's how I
that was
find
48,000 unread emails.
things. Sorry, if any of you were trying to.
That explains it.
I notice these things. Okay.
Yeah, you should see my voicemail inbox.
And then the other question I had, because I was taking some notes while you were presenting, was, so the Royalton, is that what you say, where you and Emily had your first date? And you said you wanted to go back there?
I was that night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you tell yourself if you were to go back there and sort of do the loop and see yourself there with Emily and come back and...
Oh, nothing. It worked out great. I mean, I don't want to go back to change things.
No, I
want to
know
just
that,
go back to
but-
relive it.
Because it was that good.
Really exciting and awesome, and hearts popping over your head and things like that.
Some of my favorite parts of the book were about your relationship and how you talk about Emily and the various emotions that you have over the course of the relationship before you get married. But so my first big question for you is Dwayne. So Paul's
I think I got that from John too.
Paul's name isn't Paul.
No, it is Paul.
Paul's name is Dwayne. Paul was born Dwayne Paul Sahre.
Yeah. But the book tells why I don't go by Dwayne. But my older brother is deaf, and he could not. There was a certain point where it was just like, he's not going to be able to pronounce this. Let's go with the middle name. So that's why it's Paul and not Dwayne.
But you're
It's just
so
a big-
much a Paul, though, too.
I know,
I
it's
can't
just
even
such a pain,
imagine.
though. I mean, and I've looked into getting it changed legally, but I get stopped at airports, you know. I mean, I get this kind of treatment sometimes if somebody finds out about it.
Does your mom call you?
No, she doesn't call me Dwayne. No one except for one group of friends from college we were at a bar. I had some jacket on that had my name on it, and the bartender's like, "Hey, if your jacket says Paul, your ID says Dwayne." And I had the same thing. Dwayne? Your name's Dwayne? And this group of friends still calls me Dwayne. From that one thing. Anyway.
Nobody's allowed to call him Dwayne. Okay, put that out there. So you showed a couple of illustrations from your early years, your early work. And in the prologue of the book, you talk about seeing a drawing that you did as a kid hanging in your mom's house, and it was titled "Demon Eating Human Flesh." And this upset you. Can you talk a little bit about why?
Well, it's the prologue of the book. Oh, I was going to read a dead essay. Oh, I got to do that. I'm going to do it.
Well, why don't we do it at the end?
Really?
Yes.
Oh, the prologue is really good.
Please.
All
The book
right.
is genius.
Read.
You mean now?
Later.
Yeah.
Why don't we do the interview, and then at the end,
Okay.
you can sort of read and send everybody off with the desire to want the book.
They all want the book now, anyway. No, but I got an essay here that was killed that's about Stephen Doyle. And Gina Brown.
Oh my God.
Anyway, we'll see if we...
Demon eating
So
human
it's-
flesh is actually, there's an acronym in the book, DEHF.
Yeah.
And let me just say that it joins a rogues gallery that includes, and I'm going to read you some of the titles of Paul's early work. Handprint, acrylic on wood from 1970. Dandelions, crayon on newsprint, and I believe that's what we saw
Yeah,
from
you saw that.
74. Einstein, etching, 1979. Glue, question mark, exclamation
Yeah,
point.
you saw that one.
After a still from a Tony's Pizza commercial. Tyler, Family Cat number 4, gouache on illustration board, 1982. See No Evil, 3 cats wearing glasses, graphite on paper,
Yeah, you saw that one.
1982.
That was for my mom.
Indian woman with pox-infested blanket, graphite on paper, 1984. And then you have this quote, which you go on to say, after listing all of these wonderful titles, that the data is John Hartfield decided at one point to destroy all of his early work for liberation. But you contend that you think it was probably because of his mom. And so that and the reason that you were in the house and saw that drawing was because of your mom. She put that illustration back up in the living room that then haunted you when you came home to visit.
Still there, right, guys? Yeah. It's right next to her front door. And she kind of, the drawing I did of the demon there.
Yeah, the demon.
Yeah.
Harry and Eli Sayre here for.
They have copies of their comic books for sale. They'll be signing them at the table after.
How much?
$1. Maplewood Avengers #2. The Mighty Maplewood Avengers #2.
Where it is in the book, I mean, where is it?
Next to the front
It's in
door.
your grandma's living room next to the door.
Anyway, everybody in this room probably has some similar thing, but this one in particular got very weird. It's not just embarrassing; it ties into a bunch of other things. It ends up being sort of the conduit that flows through the book to the end. Yeah.
Talk about your Frank Franzetta period.
That also relates to demon eating human flesh. I was like 14 or 15. Frank Frazetta?
Yeah.
Molly Hatchet album covers. Super realistic fantasy paintings. Amazing.
And then I'd really love for you to share the story of your grandpa's school of, Grandpa
Shope.
Grandpa Shope's Old Spice G.I. Joe.
There's an essay in here. My grandfather was Swiss, and he had this really thick German accent, and I would describe him as sort of intimidating. But we would go to his house in New Jersey and just wreck the place and leave. And he never really, so anyway, one day appeared in the bathroom was a bottle. He wore Old Spice back before it was cool. And anyway, one of our G.I. Joe heads appeared on the cap. It fit like perfectly on that little gray cap that's on there. He had found it somewhere and put it on there, and he put that on every single Old Spice bottle that he had for the rest of his life. And I have it now. He wasn't a creative person at all, but
I know where it is.
yes, yes, it is.
So how did the two of you originally meet, you and John?
So I remember seeing a poster you made in some annual somewhere. It was the Lie of the Mind poster. And I was always on the lookout for people who can design book covers and new people. And I saw this poster and didn't know who the person was. So then I tried to track this person down.
You liked it that much?
It was great. Yeah, it did a lot of things that a book cover needs to do, and not everybody does that. And so then there was about, I don't know, this was before email and stuff, and how do you find this person? And I would get phone numbers, and the phone numbers would go nowhere. I didn't know like how to contact this person. It took like weeks to find you, and then finally, after reading the book, you had a lot going on at that time in your life. And that might have been you were like moving and around and things like that. So then finally we got in touch and we met somewhere. You drove up in a car, like a Dodge Dart or something like that.
69.
Yeah. And we met at a bar and we just kind of talked about stuff and started doing some projects together.
Now it's interesting because when you talk about the work, so the piece that John saw was from Paul's work that he did for Fells Point Theater in Baltimore. And it's a really interesting part of the book because Paul, at the time, was working in a fairly conventional design firm, doing fairly conventional work. And after graduating from Kent State, where he was doing such progressive work and working so hard on creating interesting graphic design, to go to this fairly conventional shop was disheartening. And so in a moment, I guess, of really trying to make more of his life than just working in a cubicle, he went to the Fells Point Theater and told them that not only did you want to design all their posters for free, but you wanted to print them as well. And that's how this relationship started. Now, what was also interesting, John, and I don't know if you remember this part of the book, but I was really struck by this, and it's one of my questions, and it's good that James is here also, because you said that once that work started to come out, that when the work first came out, people like James, people like Stephen Doyle were reaching out to you and calling you and telling you how much they liked this work. So I have a couple of questions about that. So you saw the work, John, you saw the work in an annual, so it was winning awards, and then people like James and Stephen Doyle were calling you. Talk about what the relationship was with Fells Point. Did they, because I know even in the way you described it, they weren't all that thrilled, it seemed, with the work that you were doing. They seemed to be like, I think the comment every time you bring over a new poster was like, and then yet you were having people like John Gall and James and Stephen call you. How did you manage that sort of polarity?
Well, I also want to just say that I'm just thinking about that. I mean, Stephen Doyle and James were two people that sort of did the same thing, but I think like and it's funny to see James doing sort of you doing what you're doing right now. because there's a lot in common with that. But I think, it creates, this stuff should create connections. And reaching out to somebody, I find myself doing it from that example because we've become, really good friends and collaborators since, and, you see something that you respond to. So much of this stuff, as everyone in this room knows, who's responding to it, who's seeing it, you care about it. It's good to, I think it's always good to reach out and tell people that you're responding to something they're doing. And again, it's not fake, it's like, it's a real thing that ends up creating all kinds of different things as life in your career goes on. So anyway, the theater, the theater was really appreciative, but it was always the posters were a little too much for them. And I will definitely say this, that something I learned through the process of that. You think an experimental theater or an experimental play would need an experimental poster. Not so. They want the work to be experimental. They want people to come. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're doing it for free, they have to take it. So that was my mindset about it. Like, it should reflect what's on the stage, but what's on the stage can result in something that is too challenging if what the poster is supposed to be doing is getting people there. Right, Daniel?
Yep.
Daniel Hawkins, Soho rep for years. Yeah.
It's an interesting noise.
Yes.
What made you decide to write a graphic memoir?
Well, again, I touched on it a little bit, the influence of those books I mentioned. I also feel like, the whole monograph thing, John, you had mentioned it. I don't know, I think I operate, the best way I can describe it is I've always operated best when the expectations are really low. And by that, I mean, not that it's going to be bad, but or maybe there's a lack of an expectation. Like, what's he going to do? I don't know. I'm just going to trust. So I don't usually function as well if someone sees something and says, I want it like that. I want to have the flexibility to do what I think needs to be done in that particular situation. And that often is at odds with a creative director, an art director, or a client that might be calling you. Right?
But you don't just sit down and write a book. I mean, how do you learn? The writing is so good. I would have thought, not knowing you, that you'd been spending your whole life not only doing graphic design, but also working on your style of writing.
Well, thank you. But it's also relates to how much reading I do. If you read that Stephen King book, he feels like you need to write all the time, but you need to read all the time. I read, because of my job, John's the same way. I almost feel like, I haven't seen your book that's mostly words yet, whatever form it ends up taking, but Chip Kidd is doing it, Peter Mendelssohn's doing it. I think that there's one thing, you can open that, can you? Yeah. So I think that there's that, but I have authored books in the past. They just haven't been mostly words, and I feel like the first book I co-authored, and it was really more of an idea and the design. The second one was more writing, but I still hired a couple of writers, and then this one was training wheels off. And I have done a lot of writing. I mean, everybody writes now. The big challenge for me, and I'm sure John can attest to this, that was the most concerning thing, was not necessarily that I couldn't write an essay, but just the whole narrative from the beginning to the end of something 320 pages. That was the thing that was really had me freaked out.
No, I had complete confidence the entire time. Because even before any editing, one of the first stories that I read, they just kind of, blew me away. They just weren't as stories, they weren't as essays, and I also, I just sat say that I also think it was like really brave of you to do that, to go out and to be a writer, because suddenly you're, you know, you can put out a monograph and you can have some writing in it, but no one really reads it. But to kind of do something like this, where suddenly you're going to be compared to other like real writers, not that you're not a real writer, but you know,
Writers first, you know,
yeah,
right?
that's-
People with writing as their lead gene.
Yeah, that's a big
And
thing.
this is a book wherein it feels as if you are a writer as your lead gene. And that's what was so surprising for me. How hard was it to sell a book like this to Abrams?
New imprint.
Yeah, I think I had a bit of a honeymoon period there where.
So talk about that. So you have a new imprint at Abrams.
We don't have
so-
a new imprint, but what happened was when I started there as creative director, after a lifetime doing book covers, I came to Abrams because I wanted to be more intimately involved with the development of a book and book projects. And after the editor left, who you initially sent your material to, who was reading it, she was kind of in charge of doing a lot of the design books. I just said, wait, maybe I can, come up with some ideas. So we, pitched a few things, and this is one of them. And we have a lot of projects kind of floating around, just waiting to see what's going to kind of land next. But people were really into it. They loved, the people who read it. That once they read it, they were into it.
But it is a new imprint, isn't it?
It's not a new imprint, but we're just kind of.
Oh, this is, okay.
Your
Abrams
book
Press.
is on a new imprint.
Yeah.
Yes. Most of our design books are not on Abrams Press is a new imprint we started, which is basically narrative nonfiction. So it's real, like, they call them at Abrams, they call them reading books you read. I was not used to that term where I used to work, because all the books were reading books.
Yeah, as opposed to what? Books you look at?
Picture books,
Okay.
yeah. It was a little strange. So that's the new, so this is one of like the third or second book in this new imprint.
And so what is it like for you now, John, to not only be a creative director, but also to be working on the actual editing of the writing?
Well, it's a lot of extra work, but I'm also not doing the hard editing work. So I will work with an editor. So the person who's not here, Gabriel Levinson, who is not here because Will Smith flew him to London for a meeting. Not with him, but with his girlfriend, but still, it's still good.
His girlfriend or Will Smith's girlfriend? I thought Will Smith was married.
No, Gabe's girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
So I work very closely with editors on different projects. I'm kind of like the person who pitches it and kind of helps kind of mold the whole thing, and then has someone does the nuts and bolts work on it.
I also just want to add something because I just thought of it. So when we were just starting, I sent these essays. It was just a handful of them, and I really was concerned about writing it. Like I really was keeping an open mind to say, have John say, no, we got to get a writer assigned to this, and then you're working hand in hand with them. So then once he read it, he felt like I could do it, and then we talked about an editor, and he gave me basically two choices. You're going to be able to describe it better than I suppose, but basically, I forgot his name, but there's one really experienced editor at Abrams who had done a book that was similar to this, edited a book by Sally Mann that turns out to be very similar to what I was doing, except she's a photographer. And then this totally young guy that he felt is great and is going to make a strong connection with you, but I think at least that's the way I felt was like the more experienced editor, I would have a harder time getting my way. And the younger one, I felt like I could push around maybe a little more, but would also have way more energy,
How does it work out?
It worked out great, because Gabe was amazing, and I didn't push him around, but I could definitely put my foot down, and I did often, about like, no, don't change that, But it was, Gabriel really helped me identify the core thing that I described to you.
Which was what?
That it's about chaos and then order and then trying to deal with life as a designer, and you constantly, if you're doing it, stop it. But you can't design who your mom votes for, and you can't, bad shit's gonna happen. excuse me, guys. But stuff's going to happen, and it's going to be messy, and that's the way it goes. There's nothing that you can do about it. And if you try, you're just going to drive yourself nuts. There.
What made you decide to reveal all in this book? It's very, very vulnerable. Paul talks about bedwetting, he talks about nicknames and all sorts of moments that you reflect on with some sense of sorrow. And I'm wondering what made you decide to do that.
I think there's even a shirtless photo of him.
There is a shirtless photo. There are several, actually, I believe.
Yeah, you don't want me to do that now. I was 22 or something. Oh, I don't know.
Did you worry? Did you think, oh, people might think of me differently? Or, I mean, as I've gotten older, it's become easier to just say, I am who I am, and sort of take it or leave it. But it took a long time to get to that place. Was it hard for you?
No, I don't know. It felt totally okay. It didn't feel weird. It felt weird to other people, like my sister or my mom or, whatever. It definitely felt weirder to them than it did to me. I think it just, the other thing about the book is that I'm killing Eli. He's like so bored. He's now laying down in the front row.
I don't think my interviewing skills are impressing the boys.
They're out. I don't know, I forgot what I was saying.
I remember one thing you said was that...
You pass the microphone?
What's that?
Pass the microphone to John.
One thing you said was you were revealing so much about other people that it was like unfair unless you went and did that about yourself as well.
Talk about your dad's nickname. I thought that would be a fun story, a little anecdote to share with the audience what your dad
Oh, he called
you.
me Schmaltz. Schmaltz.
And you really loved that at
And
first.
Eli's nickname is what? His nickname is Schmeeks. Sort of relates. Anyway, my dad called me this, and I thought it was really cool until I found out later in life what it actually means, which is it's chicken fat.
So we go back
Every time he
and
said
forth.
it, he was probably like,
No, but you loved it, and it's
yeah.
it was
Nobody else in our family had a nickname.
really.
Yeah.
Want to share your story about working with Steely Dan? That's another really interesting one with a lot of typographic experiments.
Well, it was the worst. It's the worst client meeting I ever had. It degenerated into yelling at the top of our lungs.
You had a screaming match with Steely Dan.
Yeah.
And it was
They
because
started it.
They started, but they blamed you for not listening and
Yeah.
not really understanding what they wanted
Yeah.
after you had done exactly what they asked for.
No, I wouldn't do what they asked for.
No, but
I
in the
refused
first
to do it.
presentation, wasn't it what sort of was expected of you?
No, they asked for very specific things in a very weird way. I think they were high. That's not in the book, but we had 3 meetings up to that point and everything was fine. I walk in there and they were super paranoid and they were like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Do this, do this, do this. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I quit. And then they started swearing at me. And then I started swearing back. Fuck them.
Exactly.
It's fine. Actually, Walter just passed away. I'm kidding. I don't have any hard feelings. It was a long time ago.
But it's interesting that you, at the end of the book, you talk about how at the beginning of your career, you spent most of your time arguing and resenting bosses, clients, and coworkers, and basically anyone who you felt was getting in the way of your work, and you felt like you burned a lot of bridges, and you felt like the work came first, and you didn't understand why no one else seemed to feel the same way. And you go on to describe the designer's relationship to the word no.
Mom is at a pentagram retreat somewhere in the Bahamas.
Hi, Emily.
Yeah. Sending us pictures of the beach and palm trees and cats. So,
Maybe we should just talk to them.
yes, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, well, I was basically asking you about your relationship or a designer's relationship to the word no. and describe how early on in your career you would say no in ways that would elicit a defensive response and arguments and yelling. And you've learned how to say no in a more constructive and collaborative way. So what changed, and how did it change, and what do you do now when people are basically pushing up against what you would rather be doing?
You just get better at managing that, I think, over time. I certainly, when that Steely Dan meeting happened, I was younger, and I don't know, wouldn't have known really how to handle it. I would say the same thing about this Tina Brown thing that I desperately want to read to you.
Which you're going to.
But, I don't know. Designers we have to say no. You have to say no. But how you say no is really the key thing.
And so how is your saying no changed over the decades?
I've just been better about talking it through with somebody, and maybe even telling them up front, like, look, I'm probably going to be difficult to work with. I might be. You have to be okay with that, And so, I don't know. But, you chase away some people that way, but it's probably better that than...
Well, the people that remain are probably better partners.
Hey, guys.
So here's an interesting question for you. How has fatherhood changed your work?
I'm just looking at these guys thinking, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it really has.
No?
The work, no. I mean, how my relationship to when I work and how much I work. I mean, it used to be down on 6th Avenue there until 1 o'clock in the morning happily every night, and that does not happen anymore.
Now, you talk a lot about how you did so much drawing when you were growing up, and that you were the creative one, and the sort of pinnacle in your life was getting the drawing on the refrigerator, and that made you feel really special, especially to your siblings. How does it feel now when you watch them draw?
Oh, it's great. So yeah, I mentioned the comic books. Yeah, we're going to do it. If you guys don't behave
I was
yourselves,
thinking it might
won't
be
have
nice.
the-
I was actually thinking it might be great. We have 2 microphones. Why don't we ask the boys to talk about their comic book and tell us how they did it and what they did, and then after that you can read the rest, and
Okay.
after that we can do the book
Sounds
signing.
good. All right, Harry and Eli, come up.
Come on. They did this, yeah.
Everybody about the comic book.
So introduce yourself first.
I am Eli. I'm Harry.
All right, so what's it called?
It's called the Maplewood Avengers, and it's based on our family and our cats and pets, saving the day as heroes. And this one, we added our grandma's cat that used to be living at our house, but she's not anymore. And her name was Margot, and she's that cat.
Why Margot?
As the villain is a real villain. The real villain, his name is the Claw, and this thing makes a loud noise like this.
All right, so wait a minute. So the Maplewood Avengers are the Hulk. He's Illusion Master. He is Catman. I'm Two-Dimensional Man. Their mom is the Orange Spectre. And there's Flying Cooper. Anyway, we come to save the day quite often. And this is a story of one of those times.
Want to show some of the drawings?
Yeah. By the way.
Put your microphone.
By the way, my brother wrote the comic. And he drew it too, but I colored it.
He also did the binding and the collating, so he was involved in the printing as well. That's important. Anyway, look, I think that's good. I think that's good. That's good. We don't want to give the story away, man.
They are going to be selling these.
Yeah, they're $1.
At the desk when Paul is signing his book, and I believe that they are $1 a piece.
Okay, so a couple other things before we stop. Again, thank you all for coming. We have a raffle. We have items to raffle off. And we were going to do a Q&A.
Yes.
All right.
We have a lot of things that we're doing tonight, so make sure you get your raffle tickets. But here's an opportunity. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions for Paul or John. So who wants to ask the first one? Right here, sir. You want it? Okay, just speak loudly then so that James and Matteo can hear you.
Did you have a particular audience that you had in mind that you were trying to reach?
A general audience.
Can you repeat the question?
What was the audience that I had in mind? Definitely written for a general audience. I mean, it's definitely not, there's not a lot of design jargon in there. I can do that. I have a graduate degree. But I really wanted it to, there's some really boring moments in there where I'm talking about typeface or describing things. But it's on purpose, sort of, you know, so I want someone to understand. So everybody should buy the book, but give it to your mom. That's really, you know. But yeah, I wanted to see if, I wanted a general audience, yeah. But it's for designers too, I mean, obviously. I think, you know, one thing that I've been getting quite often from even people like, you know, Hjelti and Jan from Carlson Wilker, who do very different work than mine, but they read it and they're like, oh my God, like I totally identified with it, even though our work is really different and our past and our history is very different. So I think it's that thing where it's like, you know, in the specific, it's the universal somehow, you know?
Absolutely. I start another question here, and then we have one here.
I think you kind of answered it, but would you recommend this to people in your family or your life that don't understand creatives and don't understand what the process is like, to see maybe from your journey how they got there and why?
Oh, absolutely. That's my hope. You know, it's a little, it's weird because it's like, you know, when we were starting the process, I think I kept saying this to you, you know, if someone's writing a memoir, it's either a former member of KISS, and why do you buy it? It's not because the person's a good writer, it's because there's really screwed up stories in there that you want to read, you know, about the debauchery of everything that's going on. Or, you know, I just read a book not that long ago that was about a plane crash where someone survived for days. You know what I mean? Like this kind of thing. I don't have anything. I grew up in upstate New York, you know, in a boring suburb. You know, I'm a graphic designer. So there's none of, you know, it's like, so we kept having to sort of ask, like, what's the reason to do it for a general audience, you know? Which was, whether we succeeded or not, I don't know. But it was definitely something that was on, you know, editorially on our minds, for sure. Yeah.
This question here.
Yeah. Well, I read about half the book, and I really enjoyed it, but I got carried away with other things, so I'm going to get back to it. But my question is
It was
actually...
boring.
No, it wasn't boring at all. Anyway, but my question is actually for John, because John, I'm intrigued how you were able, as a book designer, to become a creative director and be able to position yourself where you're initiating projects creatively. You know, it just feels like that's quite an accomplishment, I think, in the publishing world.
Well, I just, there was kind of a space opened up and no one was sort of filling it, and I thought that I could do something there. And, you know, it's not a huge leap from,
No, it isn't, I don't think.
you know, what we do in general, because we're doing what we're doing and designing books and always thinking about, oh, this could be better, why can't we be doing this sort of thing? And it just, that little space just kind of opened up, so that's how that
But I
happened.
think you're doing something kind of that should be noted, because it's stepping out into a new arena that is really notable, that's all.
And it's fun because other people do most all the work on these, and I can just kind of sit back and
Well, you
enjoy
know,
it.
they hire designers all the time. Why can't we just hire writers? You know, I mean, right? Can we just do it the other way? So thank you for doing that and working on this book.
Other questions? Hey, want
Good.
to hear Paul do some reading from the book?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Paul, back over to you.
Oh, where'd it go?
I got it.
Oh, thanks. No, but there was where's my, Stephen Doyle snuck in here and stole it. Where'd it go?
What are you looking for?
There was a printed sheet there. Oh, it might be. Hey, Eli, can you see if it's in with the comics?
Yeah. Yep, it was.
Okay.
So you want to give us some context of what you're going to...
Well, this was in there, and the reason, there was a couple of reasons we ended up taking it out. Again, when you, I'll talk about it after. Yeah. This is called My New Shirt. I was wearing my usual jeans and t-shirt when Stephen came into my office and asked me to go buy a dress shirt. Now, actually there is a little context. So I started as an associate partner, joined Doyle Partners in 2000. Okay, so I was at a job. So I was wearing my usual jeans and t-shirt when Stephen came into my office and asked me to go buy a dress shirt. I'd like you to join in a meeting with Tina Brown. He said this in a way that made it clear that I should know who Tina Brown was. I don't remember if Stephen briefed me or if I looked her up on the internet, but he did leave a pile of talk magazines on my desk and told me to look them over, saying something like, we might have a chance to redesign this magazine. So with the help of the World Wide Web, I found a few facts about Tina Brown. I looked at the issues of talk and basically had enough time to go to Banana Republic on 6th Avenue and come back in time for the meeting. If you don't know who Tina Brown is either, my advice is to leave it there. If I could go back to a time when I didn't know who Tina Brown was, I would totally do that. It was just Stephen and Tina in the conference room when I came in. We were introduced and I sat down. She briefed us on the short history of the publication, and after a lot of press and attention, sales were lagging. My initial take was as far as the design was that the first handful of issues were well designed and had a strong graphic voice, whereas the most recent issues were kind of a mess. Editorially, I would describe it as celebrity bullshit with flair. You can tell they were groping, and I'm sure Stephen saw a design opportunity here. I wasn't going to say any of this in the meeting, of course. Stephen was doing the talking. Yes. And that was fine with me, but at one point, Tina turned to me and asked, what do you think of the magazine? It's always tricky when a prospective client asks you what they think of what they are currently doing. If you say it's great, because it never is, you can't say it's great because it never is, and you can't say it's terrible, even if it almost always is, so I steered a middle course. I think the current design lacks confidence, I said. I also told her that I thought the first few issues were great, and that the recent issues seemed to have lost their way. She turned back to Stephen and they continued talking. Stephen indicated that he'd stop at my office after he finished up with Tina. I shook her hand and left the conference room. A few minutes later, in came Stephen as promised. I was going to write that he stormed in, but Stephen didn't storm, even if he was as mad as I'd ever seen him before or since. His face was the color of PMS 485. Seething. Stephen was seething. I don't remember his exact words, but they were something like, what do you think you're doing? And are you out of your mind? And how dare you? I didn't answer any of these questions because they were clearly rhetorical. Plus, I was obviously an idiot because I didn't expect this kind of reaction to what I said in that meeting. Maybe it was the shirt. But when, do you know who that is, came, I gave my answer. No, I don't. I was feeling a little chagrined that I had blown the firm's chance to do the project when Stephen added, oh, we got the job, but do you know what she said? Again, rhetorical. She said, Stephen, I'd like you to work on this redesign under one condition, that that man, meaning me, does not go near my magazine. I never saw Tina Brown again. Talk magazine folded the next year. It probably won't surprise you, but our experiment didn't last the full year either. 8 months in, we pulled the plug. Stephen got his office back, and I went back to working the way I was meant to, alone. Bill.